What's up, my dudes? So in this video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to pop a wheelie no squilly in MX Simulator. So wheelies can definitely be one of the most fun things to do in the game. And what's cool about a wheelie is it is at its core the textbook skill practice makes perfect kind of thing, because it's one of the most simple things out there to do, but yet you could sit there and do it all day long because there's still that challenge to it. There's still that sense of you get better and better and better and better at it, but all you're really doing is working the throttle. It seems like at its core, it is just the best teacher of practice makes perfect, no matter how simple the task is. You know, I mean, when you really think about it, wheelieing is probably the easiest thing to do, but you could still work at it every single day and continue to get better at it. So I just thought that was kind of a cool thing about wheelies that I'd never really thought of before. But okay, the biggest thing to pop in a wheelie, and if you're a beginner at MX Simulator, you're probably thinking, what the hell, why can I not pull up on the bike like I can on Reflex or any of those other arcade games? Why does the front end feel so heavy? I'll tell you, okay, it is your rider mass distribution. Now, you want to be careful here, because when you start raising your rider mass distribution, this is going to change the entire balance of the bike, and you might not even be able to tell that much at the very beginning of MX Simulator, because when you're a beginner, you don't really even know what anything's doing, so it probably doesn't feel like it's doing anything in turn unless you change something like a extreme amount. But when you get really good at the game, all you got to do is change something 5 clicks and it feels like a totally different bike. So if you do go in there and change your rider mass distribution, I'm just warning you, it's going to make the entire bike like 3 times as hard to ride, because that's something you're supposed to slowly work up like you do your stability. Your rider mass distribution is basically just giving you more control over the bike, more movement over the bike. That's what it's doing. So it's also going to get you just straight up more traction, which is not always the best thing as a beginner, because you don't even know how to control the bike. You don't even know how to control the throttle. So I had to get all that out of the way just to explain your rider mass distribution is basically that bridge of how much you can actually make the bike pull upward or lean downward. And you know, like with your Reflex and stuff, it would basically already be maxed out from day one, but since it's an arcade game, you can still control the bike without crashing constantly. But with MX Simulator, it doesn't really work like that. So that's kind of your bridge to getting to a point where you can make the bike do what it does in Reflex, but that takes a long time. So really, it's not the smartest thing to be able to wheelie on day one or try to practice wheelies at a very early stage, because you shouldn't even have your rider mass distribution that high. But I'm telling you right now, if you go max out your rider mass distribution and you had it on stock, you will see a drastic change, okay? You'll be like, holy shit balls, this just flipped over on me. That's probably exactly what you'll say. Because that's what's going to happen. It's going to be like instantaneous. The front end will lift off of the ground, okay? And you're probably not used to that at all if you're used to like a stock rider mass distribution. But just think of it this way. You know, if you have a stock rider mass distribution, it's going to allow to where you can be a little bit more crazy with your leaning, and it's not going to affect the bike as much. So you're going to have way less of those moments of where it like completely almost loops out on you or endos on you over a jump. That's where that lower rider mass distribution is really going to save you. But when you get better at the game and you can control the leaning a lot better, that's when you can raise it and you can actually have more movement on the bike. You see what I'm saying there? So if you don't at least have your rider mass distribution like in that middle range or maybe even a little higher than that, you're not going to have nowhere near the wheelie potential that you need, or I guess I should say say, the pull up on the bike potential that you need to really properly ride a wheelie. You know what I mean? So that's something you've got to think about from day one. Like, you probably just should get better at the game before you ever really start practicing wheelies. And that's probably a little bit backwards from how real life is, because most people, I mean, that's the first thing they do when they get a dirt bike. You know, they go in their backyard and start popping wheelies and then get really good at wheeling. But it doesn't really work quite like that in this game, because your rider mass distribution has to be worked up slowly. I mean, it doesn't have to be, but I'm just saying, you know, that's kind of how you work up the levels in the game of how the bike controls and stuff. But let's actually get to the wheelie itself, okay? You got pretty much two different types of wheelies out there. You have a power wheelie and you have a balance wheelie, and you sort of have a third type of wheelie. You got your 12 o'clocker wheelies, but that's kind of a balance wheelie. You could almost categorize it like that too, but you've got your power wheelies, which is more of just you're pulling up the bike and then you are basically just hitting the gas and shifting the gears. So you'll go like through all of the gears on a power wheelie, and then it'll eventually just fall down at the end. But a balance wheelie is where you get it high enough to where the bike can balance in that perfect sort of balance point there, where it's not going to fall back down on you, but it's also not flipping over on you. And that may sound easy when I say it like that, but that's the whole trick to it. You know, you're trying to get it to a balance point where you don't have to shift gears. You know, if you do a proper balance wheelie, you could stay in the same gear all the way. You could ride that wheelie till the end of time, okay? That's what's so cool about a balance wheelie. You could do it forever, whereas like a power wheelie, it's eventually going to come down because you're going to run out of gears. And with a power wheelie, a lot of times you're doing that more like during a race situation or something like that, where you come over a roller section and you pick the front wheel up and you're just wheeling all the way through the rollers, kind of sort of, and then you know, it's kind of a power wheelie in that sense. So you're using it as more of an actual like a race advantage, whereas a balance wheelie, you're never really going to do this in a race. You know what I mean? Unless you're just leading, acting like a jackass. But it's, you know, one of those things. Like a power wheelie, it's good to learn that, because that could actually help you in the long run. And just wheelies in general, when you start doing things like wheel tap sections, tire tap sections, whatever you want to call them, and there's a lot of things where like wheeling on a track and just learning how it feels to wheelie the bike could actually help you a lot, you know. So it's not just like you're learning it for no reason or whatever. It can actually help you during race type scenarios. So that's something as well to always keep in mind there. But okay, so let's actually get into what you do on the bike. Okay, now for me personally, and it all depends on what kind of traction you're on as well, that changes everything. So if you're on concrete, the bike is obviously going to come up about 3 times as easy. But if you're on ice, then it may not come up at all, even if you have maximum rider mass distribution. So, I mean, whatever kind of traction you're on makes a very big difference in wheelies. But most of the time, your standard dirt, that's what I'm basing all this stuff on. I know I'm on a concrete track right here. I only did this because it had a really good long straightaway. But, I mean, most of your standard dirts on like your AMA supercross tracks and your AMA motocross tracks and stuff like that are going to be pretty standard, and you can wheelie on all those pretty much the same. Some of them are a little bit different, but just in an overall like general sense, that's what I'm basing this off of. So what you do is, and it all depends on your gearing. There's so many other little things that goes into it. Your vertical springs and stuff like that can kind of change this as well. But you got to figure out what gear you're going to be able to pick the bike up without it like instantly falling back down or instantly flipping up on you. And personally, it seems like for me, I can get it in first gear and then pull the bike up and instantly shift to second. I'm talking like it has to happen instantly. Instantaneously, I go from first to second as I'm pulling the bike up so that it doesn't lose its actual horsepower there. It's actual, you know, you have to have power to keep a wheelie going. Whether or not it's a power wheelie or a balance wheelie, you have to have power there. So if you're only in first gear, you're going to be having to do a slow as hell super balance wheelie to keep it going. So that's something, unless you have your gearing different, like I'm saying. But for me personally, that's kind of how I do it there. And when you actually pull up on the bike, it's you're not just pulling back. You're not just sitting there like with your thumbs on the thumbsticks and then just pulling back real quick. That's not really how you wheelie. For me personally, I kind of do like this lean forward and then lean back, because that's going to give you more actual pull on the bike whenever you're trying to get it up to the balance point there. And I mean, I'm sure that's probably like a really obvious thing, but if you're coming from reflex or something where you can wheelie super easy, you may just think, oh, I'm just going to lean back and it'll wheelie for me. But it doesn't work like that. You actually have to have like a lean forward and then lean back really quick, like a snap kind of motion point there to actually get the front end up properly. And the whole trick to this is you want to try to get it to where you get it to the balance point without flipping over instantly. You've got to get it to like the first part of the wheelie is, I would say, probably the hardest, because you're trying to get it just to that balance point, but not too far. I mean, it's so silly and stupid how I'm saying that, because it sounds like, okay, Spencer, we get it. It's so easy. But if you don't do that perfectly, it's going to mess up your entire wheelie. The first 2.5 seconds of the wheelie it has to be the most important part. Now, your balance is going to be important as well from side to side, and this is something some people may not quite understand there, but the side-to-side balance is maybe just as important as the forward-to-backward balance on a wheelie, because if you start going sideways, it's going to be hard to control that puppy, And so you're trying to keep it as straight as humanly possible, but you can still save it if it gets a little bit sideways or something like that. If it starts irking one way, and if you happen to pull up and it like irks the one way, you can kind of turn the handlebars the other way, where you're kind of doing a Willy Boys type wheelie, where they're just turning the handlebars one way and wheelie in the other. You can kind of do that and still ride a wheelie out pretty decently, but so that's something you can do there as well. But I think it's just you got to do it. I mean, first and foremost, that's going to help you more than anything I could ever possibly say. You just have to do it, practice it over and over and over, and once you get it to that balance point, then you'll learn kind of what you're doing. And a big thing to the balance point as well is obviously going to be having your back brake eject button there. Now, this goes into play where you want to make sure you've got your throttle and your back brake both on buttons where you can reach them properly with your button layout. You don't want your back brake where you can't really reach it when you're trying to do a wheelie or something like that. You want to have it right there handy so that you can tap it if the front end gets too high on you. Now, when you start doing that back brake tapping, this is going to be really hard to keep your wheelie going when you do that. So that's something to keep in mind. You should be able to do a balance wheelie without tapping your back brake. You should be able to do that. If you're doing a 12 o'clocker where you're skimming the back fender and bringing it back down a little bit, then skimming the back fender and bringing it back down a little bit, then yeah, you're obviously going to have to be tapping the back brake to do a 12 o'clock style wheelie. But just a standard balance wheelie, you really don't have to hit your back brake. As long as you balance it, get it to that balance point right, and you're able to just get on and off the throttle at perfect points in time there where you can keep it steady. But I mean, the back brake is a good tool, but it's going to kill your momentum as well. So it's going to be really hard to let's just say you got a balance wheelie going. It's going to be hard to tap your back brake and then get the front end back up to that balance point where you can continue to balance it, because now you're off kilter and you're leaning forward and backwards too much, and then it's hard to keep your wheelie going at that point, it seems like. So that's something to keep in mind as well. If you ever tap that back brake, it's going to make the entire wheelie twice as tricky to get it back to your rideable point there. So, but remember, I know a lot of beginner MX Simulator players have their front and back brakes set on the same button. I don't know what the heck that would do, but I wouldn't personally do that. I would have my back brake on its own button. That way you can just hit that and you're not hitting your front brake as well. I don't even know what that would do. I don't even know if it affects anything really, hitting your front brake. I don't know if it changes any sort of inertia. It shouldn't, because in real life it wouldn't, but I don't know. This is a game. Even though it is a simulator, I'm just not sure what it exactly does with that, because I've never had it on that. But personally, I would just have your brakes separate. I mean, not only for a just like professional gameplay standpoint, but even just wheelies and just all that random stuff like that. But you're really going to have to learn where you can be able to get on your throttle and your back brake very, very easily and simplistically, and where it's not a chore to do it. That's a very big trick too, being able to do it. So that's another thing. But yeah, wheelie is probably one of the funnest things out there. Now, as far as throttle and all that, it's in the leaning aspect of it. It's not like you're just leaning back the whole time. You wheelie. I think that's a very big point. I'm glad I remembered that. You know, when you're actually in the middle of the wheelie and you're going down through there, you're not just leaning all the way back the whole time, which is something you probably would do on like Reflex or any of those other games out there. This one, you're actually balancing your body the entire time, kind of, sort of. So you've got to play with your lean forward and lean back. You know, the bike comes back a little bit more. You have your throttle, your back brake, and your leaning, basically. That's what you have. And if you turn when you're already popping a wheelie, it's not really going to do anything. The leaning is what's going to actually change everything. So that's pretty much your three different options of balance and control. You know, you got to have your throttle control, but your throttle has limitations to it. You know, you're either going to have to shift gears or do something, because if you have that throttle wide open, it's either going to fall down or it's going to flip over. You know, so that's where the leaning comes in. You have to lean and balance with your throttle. I'm probably making this way too complicated here, but I'm just trying to explain it to a core, all the way through kind of sense here. You're not just leaning back. You know, you're leaning forward, leaning back, hitting the throttle, letting off the throttle a little bit, hitting some more throttle. And this is another thing where you're going to want your throttle on an actual trigger and not a freaking button. I don't know how the fuck those dudes ride with their throttle on like the A button or some shit like that. I don't know how they do that. I think it's critical in this game to have your throttle where it's actually a trigger. You know, you have a little bit of play there with it, where you can ease on the throttle and ease off of the throttle, and that has to make wheelies 100 times easier. And then also with your brakes, you know, you want them that way as well. Now, it gets tricky because there's only two actual triggers on most controllers out there, so that's where you kind of got to be smart with it a little bit, I think, and you got to figure out what you want to do there. But yeah, that's pretty much how to wheelie, man. You can do wheelies where you kind of like wheelie in a circle and you turn with it, and you can still keep it up pretty good in this game. It's actually quite realistic how that is. And one other thing, I mean, if you're on like a 125 or one of those smaller bikes, it's going to be hard to wheelie. It's just everything is harder on a smaller bike, basically. That's why I started on a 450, and I've always tried to stay on a 450, because it's just, I feel like I'm more capable of doing everything on a 450. It's easier to wheelie, it's easier to huck quads, it's easier to do everything with it. And obviously I love 125s to death with all my wide open videos, but there's just nothing like that 450, bruh. Hey dudes, I just wanted to let you know that there is a link in the description to donate to me if you want to support me, and if you can't or you just don't want to, I totally understand. That's why it's completely optional, but I will be listing my top 10 donators at the end of every single future video, and I will shout out every new donator at the end of a video, even if they're not top 10. So I want to let you guys know that I have all of my different playlists on my front page, whether it be game-specific playlist or series-specific playlist, So if you're looking for any particular game or particular series that you want to watch, I have it all laid out there in a pretty organized manner on my front page. And my email address is spencerturley@live.com, no space, no capital. And I do accept sponsorship offers. And you guys should also follow me on Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, PlayStation Network, Xbox Live, Steam, all that different stuff at Spencer Turley, no space, no capital. So anyways, I appreciate you guys watching the videos. Later, dudes.